Our scripture today is from the second chapter of Luke, verses 1 through 14. In those days, Caesar Augustus published a decree ordering a census of the whole Roman world. The first census took place when Quirinius was governor of Syria. All the people were instructed to go back to the towns of their birth to register. And so Joseph went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to the city of David, Bethlehem in Judea, because Joseph was of the house and lineage of David. He went to register with Mary, his espoused wife, who was pregnant. While they were there, the time came for her delivery. She gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She put him in a simple cloth, wrapped like a receiving blanket, and laid him in a feeding trough for cattle, because there was no room for them at the inn. There were shepherds in the area living in fields and keeping night watch by turns over their flock. The angel of God appeared to them, and the glory of God shone around them. They were very much afraid. The angel said to them, "You have nothing to fear. I come to proclaim good news to you, news of great joy to be shared with the whole people. Today, in David's city, a Savior, the Messiah, has been born to you. Let this be a sign to you. You'll find an infant wrapped in a simple cloth, lying in a manger." Suddenly there was a multitude of the heavenly host with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in high heaven, and on earth, peace to those on whom God's favor rests." A traditional story for our consideration in the present day.
Thank you for being here. It's always good to share Sunday with you. One situation that arises for me every Christmas season is that whereas the hymns of Christmas are probably my favorite hymns of the year, they're so mystic and gentle and all of that, the commercial songs of Christmas are my least favorite. And I realize it says more about me than it says about the songs. So if you love those songs, this is not a criticism of that. But I have trouble going into the store this time of year without like trying to leave within 3 minutes with the different songs. And I think part of it is just realizing how beautiful the mystical meaning of these symbols are and how far from that our nation has gone, including the churches. That the point of the parable of this, and it is a parable, there's different stories of Christmas and they don't line up correctly because that was not the point. The point is to give this parable of how the sacred enters our life. So when we get focused on the magical parts of the story, as understandable as that is, angels are pretty impressive. It's not really supposed to be about the angels. It's not supposed to be about the messenger. It's the message, this message of love. And if we can't see the sacred in poor children in our own nation, then we're missing the point of why Jesus was born in a cattle stall. Right? The lowest possible beginning for a human being, and yet a soul of infinite worth. If we can't see that in the children of Flint, Michigan, if we can justify letting people live without hope, living without health care, then we've not understood the message of Christmas, in my opinion. And when we have our specials and then we have the military fly overhead and we watch our troops occupying other people's lands, it's not a criticism of the troops, the people themselves, but we are an empire. And in the story, Joseph and Mary are fleeing their government. They have to flee the empire that's there, the system of domination. When we take that out of the story, then we begin to understand why this stuff isn't changing the world. And some of it's very painful for me. And I'll say this, and again, if this doesn't affect you, it says more about me than you. But when you watch the Trail of Lights, you hear the story of the light shining in the darkness, this gentle, dimly lit scene in a manger. And then you have this exotic light display, knowing that we're killing people for that energy. Kind of numb to that. That we ask ourselves, why isn't this stuff changing the world? And there's an obvious reason. We've never gone to the root of it. So the reason I'm saying this is not to take the buzz off of Christmas. You can do both, right? You can enjoy the traditional corporate Christmas with some, balance to it. But if we miss the mystical, I think it's a tragedy. I think it's a tragedy for us personally, but it's also a tragedy for our world, where Christianity has become a very dysfunctional religion in many places. And I think a lot of times when we try to be happy by ignoring the message of Christmas, that there's a light shining in our darkness. It's like you don't have to bring garish lights. It's when you're there alone and you're lonely and you can't figure out what your worth is. There's a light shining there. When you realize that your life is much larger and more intertwined than you may think. So far as we've looked at this, the Escher series, maybe it seemed too intellectual, but during the Christmas hymns, I think we can see that there's something very important about our hearts that is there as well. What I'm hoping is that we can go more deeply into the mystical parts of Christmas, not to throw away the other things, but where our tinsel isn't just decorating a kind of desperate, depressed view of the world, where our worth comes from what we own, our power is our sense of what other people we can control. That is not going to make us happy ever. So today we're looking at another Escher image, another very strange one. And a lot of times when he draws these things where you have these kind of twisted buildings and people are having very different experiences that you see, he said at one point, there's nothing to say that a ceiling can't be a floor, or a floor can't be a ceiling. That we experience the world differently, different cultures, different people, different species. And part of what Jesus is calling us to do is to be able to look at life from all of those vantage points. When Jesus taught people, consider the birds of the air, it's incredibly important to realize he took them away from churches, from the temples, but he wanted to get them away from traditional religion. He took them away from the city and their businesses. They took them away from everything they were familiar with. And he said, look at the birds of the air. Now think about starting off your ministry with that. Not the Apostles' Creed, not anything the church has ever taught. Just look at the birds. Consider what your life means to them. Consider what their life means to you. How does life interweave? It seems to me. So as we look at this, I hope that the picture is suggestive that when Jesus is telling parables, he's not trying to indoctrinate us, but instead give us a wider, deeper sense, awareness of life, who we are, and who other people are, to deepen, broaden this kind of thing. I do not believe you can understand the universal love of Jesus Christ, radical universal love, within the context of nationalism. I don't believe it can be done. I think the point was people were called out of Rome, they were called out of their own empires, to be good neighbors to those outside, to the oppressed. Mary and Joseph are fleeing the powerful people. I don't believe even that you can teach this universal love within traditional sectarian Christianity. We need to remind ourselves every week that Jesus never saw the New Testament. Never saw it. He was way dead before the Apostles' Creed was written. Right? So what the church has done is silence the Sermon on the Mount by lifting up other kind of theories. And there's nothing wrong with the theories. There's nothing, you can have that religion too. But if we lose the radical universal love that Jesus came to teach us, it's not going to save our world. It's not going to do what we're hoping that it will do. And it wouldn't be one of my sermons if I didn't mention that we cannot do this within predatory capitalism. You cannot value property over human beings. You cannot let the children of the poor suffer and experience the depths of your own heart. But Christmas is a calling out of the oppressions. And none of us is comfortable with it. But again, once we experience this, once we start living this journey out, there's a joy, there is a peace that we can't get any other way. And one of it is to realize that our lives are bigger than we think. So just getting depressed because it isn't working out for you may not be as helpful as realizing you are affecting people in ways you may not realize. I mean, some of the people that probably helped you most in life, they didn't know they did it. Right? A teacher that helped you get your coat on, made you feel good about yourself. They probably forgot that in 4 minutes, and you've probably remembered it your whole life. But it's also important to realize that you are deeper than what is happening to you. And these are the themes that keep coming up in all of this Escher series, is that we're deeper, we're coming from something deeper in life than what happens to us. You can't always feel it, but to know that there's peace inside of you if you can go deep enough. That you are a light shining out of the darkness in this mystical imagery. That your consciousness is shining from the heart of the universe. And so the horrible things that are happening to you at the surface level cannot dim that invisible light of which you are an expression. Which means your suffering matters, right? None of us wants to suffer. If we could set it up where we didn't, that'd be great. But your pain, your disappointments, all of these things bring a beauty into the world that wouldn't be there any other way. In the story, Mary is pregnant. This is not good news in that particular culture. And something I never saw when I was in church, I never heard this mentioned. All the times I'd celebrated Christmas is they're not married. But they're not married when they go to the Christmas motel. That's not good Presbyterian stuff. But life is like that sometimes. Sometimes you cannot tie the jagged ends together, and you have to realize that your life is deep enough to claim that, to transform that. The hymn we're going to be singing in a few minutes is It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. And this is a hymn that was written by a Unitarian minister who had kind of fallen out of favor. He had a giant church. He struggled with depression. He kind of had a breakdown, so he's in a very small church now. And he's depressed because of the Mexican-American War. There's a verse, an anti-war verse that's taken out of the hymn, of course. You know, that's not religious, that's not spiritual, to question war. But the Mexican-American War was the loss of innocence for many, many Americans. Abraham Lincoln realized you can't just be a good patriot when your country is dominating other cultures and stealing from them. Mark Twain became an anti-imperialist. And I don't know that you can listen to the songs of Christmas and be a good imperialist. It's kind of a call out of empire and into your human family. And what a healing place that is to be. But again, you have to trust this something inside of you, this intuition inside of you. Reason is very good at understanding spatial relationships, like A plus B equals C. But figuring out how things grow requires something beyond reason. It requires intuition. You can look at a caterpillar all day and all night, and reason will never tell you that that's going to become a butterfly. But that's a different kind of wisdom. There's a wisdom of unfolding. And that's just as important as reason is. So mysticism is putting those together. Mysticism is realizing that you are not simply logical, reasonable. You're also this intuitive, living, unfolding being. One of my favorite statements of mysticism, maybe my favorite that I've ever run across, and I've studied religions from all over the world, is Einstein's. And Einstein didn't believe in God, but he seems like a mystic to me. Listen to this. A human being is part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of our consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affectation for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion and to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. I've never heard it said better. So, whatever happened to you, if you can remember there's a depth out of which you come, if you can remember that your life is larger than whatever's happening to you, and then finally, every particle in the universe resonates with every other particle. So the idea that there are angels speaking to you is a poetic way of understanding that life speaks to you. Even when you're alone, even when it seems silent. You probably experience it through animals sometimes, maybe through plants, maybe through nature, that there's something addressing us. And it feels so intimate, but it doesn't fit into any of our kind of belief systems. Usually it's mystical, it's a mystery. So when we see the angels, maybe they were people with birds' wings on their back, maybe. But I think everybody would have converted if there had been angels sitting on all the buildings. I mean, I think I would have got it anyway. But what if you realize that every being that you run across is speaking to you, is a face of this sacred source? And you think of the times when people have just, by being present with you, became a conduit to the sacred. Animals, it happens anytime you see beauty, kind of thing. Have you ever loved somebody so much that it was almost like you wanted to pull their skin away so you could get closer? You could never get close enough? No, not. I don't mean literally, but I mean that there's something inside of other people that you love that you can't, it's not tangible. It's something so deep that you can't really capture it. And what happens with this kind of mystical thing is you don't get rid of your problems. They're still there, but they move to the backdrop. In the Christmas story, Mary's pregnant, they're being hunted. All of that stuff is still there from beginning to end. But there's a joy that moves to the front of the story without changing the details. You do not have to transform the universe and completely revamp your life to experience this incredible joy, this sense of interconnectedness, this sense of depth. So, I mentioned I've got a problem with some Christmas music. My problem, not yours. But I want to encourage us, particularly as we sing this next hymn, to try to go into it. This is somebody who was depressed when they wrote it. And yet they found this joy. But they manifested this joy. They couldn't change the politics of their day. But they still experience this depth, this peace, this joy. When it talks about a coming age of gold, I don't think that necessarily happens externally in the world. But it can happen in our hearts. And so this Unitarian minister said, still through the cloven skies they come. Life is speaking to us. Love is speaking to us always. if we realize that our lives are bigger than our personal stories, that we are members of the human family, the universal human family, and all of the earth is our home, if we realize there's a depth that we come out of, a light that shines in our darkness, even when we're depressed and we can't feel happiness, to know that's there, to know the sacred is always there, that we're always the one not experiencing it, that it's always here, always now. Right? To realize that the sacred is never someplace else. You never have to go looking for it. If you get still, then you can hear those messages. I want to close with one of the last verses of the hymn. And again, this is one depressed person reaching out to try to share the joy and the peace that he got in touch with. And ye beneath life's crushing load, whose forms are bending low, who toil along the climbing way with painful steps and slow. Look now, for golden hours come swiftly on the wing. Oh, rest beside the weary road and hear the angels sing. Well, those are my struggles with the text. We invite you now to take a minute and think of how you would have preached this.